welcome to my music room. We're here on location today at my house because I want to talk about the Elector analog preamplifier from the German brand SPL and explain why it's one of my favorite pieces of gear that I've heard in a very long time. Now, it has a very special synergy with my system, and I used my ears to find this out, but by the end of this video, hopefully we'll give you enough information that you can use your mental ears to try to figure out if it's right for your system. Now, I'm going to do a somewhat abridged review in this video, but if you're interested in diving deeper and have some reading time on your hands, head to the Music Room's website, tmraudio.com. Scroll down to the bottom, you'll find the blog section, and you can read all about the Elector in my 4-part in-depth review. You can see what it looks like on the inside, learn more about the German brand Sound Performance Lab, and find out what makes this beautiful little box tick. The Elector has a small footprint and a pretty face, if I do say so myself. I chose a red faceplate to review because I really like the way the black knobs and chassis work to blend into my otherwise all-black system, and I love the way the red really pops right in the middle of the rack. It's got a down-to-business feature set up front with just a few knobs and switches, and of course those gorgeous analog meters to remind you of its pedigree. There are 3 sets of balanced inputs and 3 single-ended RCA inputs, as well as a tape monitor path and a direct out via a pair of RCAs, which bypasses the volume control and sends the full signal for added flexibility. You can use this output to drive a headphone amplifier like the SPL Phonitor XE headphone amp that I'm also in the process of reviewing. Now, German company Sound Performance Lab, or SPL for short, designs and manufactures the Elector Pre at its factory in Germany, and they make a whole range of equipment, most of it pro audio focused. Now, it's not unprecedented for a more pro audio company to come out with a product that's embraced by the hi-fi community. Bricasti, ATC, Weiss Engineering with their DAC 501, they come to mind, in this category of companies that straddle the line between pro audio and home hi-fi. But occasionally there will be great products that come out of these companies that are more pro-focused, and they make for an amazing hi-fi product just like the Elector. Sound Performance Lab has been in business for nearly 40 years, and they know a thing or two about analog circuits. In fact, like some other very high-tech companies on the scene today, they have their own proprietary high-performance operational amplifier, or op-amp, design, which uses relatively high voltage DC rails and larger discrete components to achieve incredibly low noise and high dynamic range. The rails aren't as high as, say, a B+ supply in a tube amp, but compared to other op-amps, it's high. They call their approach Voltaire, and they use 60 volts plus or minus, that's 120 total, to power their op-amps, as opposed to the more typical 15 or 18 volts used in a lot of other circuits on the market. All of SPL's products use through-hole design, which means no machine-placed minuscule surface mount or SMD parts. The boards are stuffed, soldered, and tested by hand in their own manufacturing facility in Germany. The use of traditional discrete components rather than chips or SMD allows them to run their op-amps at higher voltage and get plenty of linear gain in their circuits so that the dynamic range is large and the noise is kept incredibly low as it relates to the signal. Now, I know a number of audiophiles personally that aren't convinced still of the need of a preamplifier in a system. I used to be one of those because I have a DAC streamer combo that has a volume control and claims to not need a preamplifier in use. In practice, however, I always noticed a little bit of hiss coming from the speakers when the system was on, and if I turned the DAC off, the hiss would go away. So it clearly wasn't my amp. Clearly there was some noise being introduced into the system, and figuring out and learning why that is helps understand and explain the whole reason for having a preamplifier, the most important reason for having a preamplifier in a hi-fi setup. Here, I'll show you what I mean. I'm going to put my microphone up to the tweeter so that you can hear the hiss. The DAC is connected directly to the amplifier. Hear that hiss? You can hear that from my listening position when the room is quiet and the music's not playing. Many DACs on the market today sport a digital volume control, and some are high-tech, like this PS Audio Direct Stream Junior, which upsamples the bit depth, or products from Lumen, which use their lead-H technology to try to achieve a more exact truncation by reducing errors in the volume control process. Both of these are unique approaches in the hi-fi DAC landscape. Now, when a typical DAC lowers the volume using its digital volume control, it throws away bits of information, actually making the dynamic range of the DAC smaller. DAC designers that are trying to get around this, maybe in the case of my DAC, will do something like upsampling the bit depth so that it never goes below a certain threshold even if the volume control is low. Now, DAC engineers, when they're designing these DACs, use filtering to bring the noise of the DAC down as far as they can go, while balancing the need to not disrupt the phase of the signal or create any ringing effects. Now, DAC noise, self-noise, is called quantization noise. And this noise is created from the sampling, the act of sampling itself of an analog signal into a digital one, and sampling errors created along the way. Now, most filters are, kind of gentle so that they won't disrupt the phase, and a better DAC will have a better set of filters often on the output of the DAC than a DAC that doesn't sound so good in a hi-fi system. The best way to use a DAC in the system, or a DAC streamer like in my case, even if it's a DAC streamer pre or claims to be, is to run it at full strength so that the signal to noise ratio is the highest, and run that into an analog preamplifier where you can then lower the volume to the appropriate level. The reason being is that the DAC noise, the quantization noise, is independent of the signal coming from the DAC. So it's independent of the volume position that you have it at. Now, in an analog preamplifier, the noise is dependent on the signal. A great preamplifier has very low self-noise, like this Elector preamplifier. And so what it's doing is it's attenuating the DAC's noise along with the signal, and the result is a nice black background when you're listening. Now, my system is amplified by a vintage all-tube audio research amp. And I've done a lot of work to make sure that its noise is absolutely as low as possible. But when I have an analog preamplifier in the mix, it's completely silent. And this is contrasted with my experiences before having the preamplifier in the mix, where I could just hear a little bit of hiss. So that's one of the biggest reasons to have an analog preamplifier. And actually, let's listen to the difference with the Elector in place. Okay, now the preamplifier is placed in the system between the DAC and the amp. And as you can hear, which I'll show you with this microphone, there is absolutely no hiss audible, even right up on the tweeter. And to prove that it's on, I'll play a little bit of music for a second here. So what I get with this preamplifier in my system is an absolute black background. Now, there's a lot of reasons to love a preamplifier in a hi-fi system: the added sense of drive and body to the sound, the channel separation, the extension of the sound stage, and of course the extra analog inputs. But perhaps the best reason in this modern digital streaming age is the noise control function of the preamplifier, and how its noise is dependent on the signal. All right, so let's take a closer look at the Elector, and I'll shut it off here. Now, when you pick up the Elector, you realize that SPL saved a little bit of cost in making a smaller and a little bit lighter chassis. Now, it's not super light, to be sure. It's got a nice transformer inside, and it feels very durable. But compared to some other preamplifiers that I've held, it certainly is on the smaller and lighter side. And I think this is a check in the pro column for the Elector. I like to see when a manufacturer puts a little bit more cost into the sound of a product than the way it looks necessarily, or how heavy it might be. It does look very nice, though, from the listening position. They give you a nice machined front faceplate, and the knobs and switches were chosen with the feel in mind, making for an overall great feeling product, and one that endears you to it before you even listen to it. Now this is a $3,000 preamplifier, which to some might be on the high end, but I found its performance in much higher priced hi-fi systems shows that it can hit way above its weight class. I tested the Elector in several systems over a couple of months, systems including Wilsa Sasha DAW speakers, a system featuring the new PS Audio Aspen FR30 speakers, and a couple of systems incorporating large phase coherent Dunlavies like mine. One of the best things about the sound of the Elector preamplifier is that it really does not have a sound of its own. I heard completely different systems with it in place, so the preamp didn't lend its own voice. It just did all of the things a good preamp will do, and provided one of the quietest black backgrounds for the music that I've heard. Specifically, in my tube-based system, I noticed it had astonishing synergy. It gave my system more accurate and authoritative bass, extended and not over-etched highs, and incredibly liquid and detailed mid-range. And this is compared to a very highly regarded tube preamplifier that is twice the Elector's price, which I had in my system up until now. This preamp has mid-range to die for. Vocals have great layering and depth, and if the signal gets congested or busy in that mid-range area, it separates things extraordinarily impressively. I think top to bottom, the sonic balance of this preamp is very natural and accurate. And I think the special synergy in my system has to do with the high dynamic range of the SPL's op amps and its incredibly low self-noise. I've got a vintage tube amp, and when you mate solid state with its vanishingly low distortion and incredibly low self-noise with the magic of tubes, you have a great mix. It's one of my favorite things to do, to mix tubes and solid state in a system. Perhaps my favorite feature of this little beauty from Germany is the way it can pair with just about any remote control out there. I grabbed my unused old Apple TV remote from the basement, pressed the white button on the back panel of the Pre, pressed the down button on the remote while aiming the remote at the meters until the volume knob's LED blinked 4 times, pressed the up button repeatedly the same way, and in about 20 seconds I had a rock-solid connection to the volume control of the preamplifier from my listening position about 10 feet away. A good preamplifier is one that lets your system flesh out every detail, and one that does nothing to reduce the soundstage width and depth. In my system, I'm hearing layers and 3D arrangement of images that is more of a natural and complete presentation than I've heard with any other preamp in its spot. The astoundingly low noise floor of this preamp and its liquid flow make it a great mate for a ton of hi-fi systems out there. If you've been on the fence about whether to add a separate preamplifier to the mix, or you are curious to try an option that might be quieter or more neutral than what you've got, the SPL Elector might be the preamp for you. At the Music Room, we can take a trade that you might have in mind to help offset the relatively affordable cost of this preamplifier, making that choice that much easier for you. Now, I absolutely love this piece of gear, and it is not going to leave my system, I can tell you that. I think German pro audio maker SPL has made an absolute gem of a product with the Elector, and it gets my highest recommendation as an easy plug-and-play fit for any hi-fi system. Well, thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe and leave a comment below if you've heard the preamplifier, the Elector preamplifier, or if you're thinking about upgrading your system to a separate preamplifier. For everyone at the Music Room, I'm Duncan Taylor, and if you'll excuse me, I've got an exciting killer system to listen to. Wishing you happy listening and best of luck in finding the perfect synergy for your hi-fi system.